I think we're ready for our first speaker, our keynote speaker. He is one of the co-founders of StrongLoop and one of the main contributors of Node.js. Welcome.
Back.
Give it up for Bert Belder!
All right. Yeah, the plan was to actually jump on a turtle when that music played, but the turtle is still at my hotel, so unfortunately that didn't really go over well. Good morning, everyone. I can't really see you, by the way. That's going to be a little difficult. But never mind, you can see me, hopefully. This morning, I'm going to talk to you about something non-technical, basically. Usually I do tech talks, and the thing I put on my slides is a lot of code. That's basically to impress you and like make you a little bit scared. But today, since this is the first talk and this is the keynote, I thought I'd not do that. Instead, what I'm going to do is give you a little bit of a personal account of how Node.js became. And I'm saying a personal account because I don't really have to do these things yet, but I'm going to do it anyway. These are my sort of personal views. Like you might run into Node.js core contributors that think different, or even my employer. Speaking of which, indeed, I'm a founder of StrongLoop. But StrongLoop, as you might know or not know, is like actually much younger than Node.js. I've been involved in Node.js since 2010-ish, and StrongLoop is only 2.5 years old. And when we started this company, actually, we wanted to do something commercial with it, you know, get rich quick, maybe, if that's what you want to say. It's not so easy, by the way, but never mind. And so what we do mostly is enterprisey stuff for Node. So if you have a really big company, we have things to help you deploy it, work with large organizations with like different roles. As like, I'm guessing that most of you here are like work for smaller shops, or like are hobbyists, or work on your own startup, or whatever you do, and so it may not make so much sense for you. On the internet, you can recognize me with that yellow picture. Also for kids, I guess, or if you like a little bit harder, my Twitter handle is Piscasaurus. Nobody ever can remember that, so just look, you know, use your visual memory. Anyway, ingredients for a great open source project. Oh, another disclaimer. I like to set expectations right. My slides are not going to be very interesting. You could replace, I think, open source project with petting zoo. Ingredients for a great petting zoo. It would probably still work. It has a lot of like great cheesy stock photography and platitudes. Most of the things that are interesting, hopefully, I will tell to you. Anyway, so let's get started. Ingredient 0 is sort of demonstrated by this slide. By the way, this is Ryan Dahl. Ryan Dahl was the actual inventor of Node.js. It wasn't my idea, or I'd like to claim it was my idea, but I just didn't tell anyone. But this was a guy who actually told people about this awesome idea. This was in 2009, the first introduction at NodeConf EU, I think. No, JSConf EU in Berlin. And what this little slide here reads is probably a little bit hard for you guys to read, is cultural bias. Some code looks pretty much like Node code, is rejected as too complicated. All right, too complicated. So I think ingredient 0 for a great open source project is a healthy dose of naivete. That definitely applied to Ryan Dahl. Although he was great in many ways, I think he underestimated how hard it would be to actually create a platform that we could bring to world domination. Because this is the joke we make. Node.js is going for world domination, a little bit like Dr. Evil, I guess. And so far, it's working out, right? You know, every year, the conference get a little bit bigger. I see now there's people in the third row, so you know, even this year, like an extra number of people joined. And actually, this applied to me too, because when I got involved, I thought I could do something, and I'll go into that later. I thought I could do something in a day, and it ended up taking a year. And so obviously, it keeps me employed. That's the good news. The bad news is, after this talk, you may never want to do an open source project. But OK. The real obvious ingredient for an open source project is an idea that's there first, and it's 10 times better. And that requires a little bit of explaining. But the 10 times better philosophy is definitely something that we take very serious. So if you think about Node.js, very simply put, the way it was 10 times better is that it combined a couple ideas and it made things possible that people were unable to do, or like that was really, really much harder to do before that. Different people, by the way, have different sort of angles to it. I think when Ryan Dahl invented Node.js, what he wanted to do is low-level network programming. And he wanted to do that in a way with evented I/O, basically. You have to understand, he came from a Ruby background, and it does all this event loop thing that Node.js is famous for. The only thing it didn't do is proper asynchronous, build everything about the concept of asynchronous I/O or evented I/O. And so in practice, if you wanted to use that, you had to write everything yourself. So what he said is, well, if I wanted to, I can have an event loop, but if I talk to the database, everything is super slow because only one thing can happen at the same time. Obviously, if you wanted to do low-level networking, that was always possible. The only thing you have to learn about is BSD sockets, a little bit of C, a little bit of Unix history, not really that hard, but still 10 times harder, I believe, than what Node.js uses. My personal angle, by the way, was JavaScript. And for me, when I got into it, it was also 10 times easier because before that, we had to run a headless Firefox, which was the terrible idea to begin with. But that was the only solution that was available before Node.js was there. And then there's, of course, as I said, you have to be there first. Many people try to improve upon existing technologies a little bit, and often with good reasons, for good reasons. If you think about, for example, Dart, the language Dart. Anybody here heard of Dart? Can I see hands, by the way? Let me see. OK, and who actually uses Dart? Oh, there's someone in the back, actually. Oh, no, wait, that's not a hand. He was poking his nose. Never mind. No, so here's the thing. Dart obviously is a great invention. It's but nobody cares about it because it is not 10 times better, and it wasn't there first. It is basically 2 times better, and it was what JavaScript probably should have been, but never was, and so nobody gives a shit, right? I'm going to go 2.2. This is me. This is when I was a little younger. I mean, I looked a little younger, I think. And this is in San Francisco. By the way, this is my co-founder Ben Nordhaus. Here's Ryan Dahl. Still, when he looked like a hipster, still, that's what you have to do when you live in San Francisco. And I put this picture up because this was sort of the fellowship of the ring for about a year. Ingredient 2 for your great open source project is people that get the job done. And that's definitely not as easy as you think. You have to imagine, there's not necessarily a lot of money or resources available for an open source project. And so it can be very daunting to actually get something done, to do proper quality assurance, to find, to translate your great idea into like actual things that work. But as I got involved in Node.js, which was in 2010, my initial angle was I wanted to port it to Windows. That was the thing I thought I could do in a day. And I'll give you a little bit of background, actually. I was working at I'm Dutch originally, startup, and we were automating things for construction companies. And we had a fairly intricate computation as part of our source code that we did in two places. We did it on the server for security reasons, and we did it on the client in the browser for performance, to be super responsive. And that, of course, created a big maintenance headache. Because, if there's a slight, your code is slightly off, if there's a rounding error, then whatever the front end computes does not match what the back end does. And, the user will be super upset because the numbers are different, or even the server might reject whatever the front end has computed. It's really terrible. So what I needed to do is, since I couldn't run PHP on the front end, I had to run JavaScript on the back end. It's as simple as that. So when I learned about Node.js, I was like, this is great. After, as I said, trying different things, running headless Firefox, after trying a product called Aptana Jaxer, I believe. I don't know if that still exists, but that all didn't work. And I saw his talk, and I was like, this is amazing. We're going to use this. Practical problem, it didn't work on Windows. And I was kind of done, I didn't really like my job that much at the time. So I was like, well, let me just sit down for a day, port it to Windows. How hard can it really be? And that's, I think, generally a reasonable idea. The only thing is that, in particular, the asynchronous I/O part that Node.js tries to do is vastly different. It's vastly different when you do Windows. So what happened is I sat down and I got a really minute piece working, and then I kind of gave up. But it kept coming back to me. So next week I did a minute little thing. And at that point I figured that a couple other people had tried already so far and not gotten there. But since I had got something working, I sent a patch, basically an email to our mailing list with a little snippet of code, this is how it should be done. And I kept doing that. And of course nobody cared. Until at some point I got an email from Rackspace. And they said, we need this. We need this thing to run on Windows. And so we'll pay you for that. And I was like, yes. Yes, because I loved working on it. But not only that, I was kind of as I said, I was done with my job. I hated it at the time. So that was an amazing opportunity. Now you think this must be the end of the story. Well, probably not. We'll talk about that a little bit later in my talk. But the thing that happened is, once you start writing code for an open source project, a very large chance is that you'll basically be ignored. That's very unfortunate, of course, but it is really the way it is. And so I think it didn't happen until maybe half a year later, until March 2011, that I actually got a response. And the response was, I was on holiday actually in Cyprus, I believe. The response was on Twitter, and it said, this is a good idea, but we're going to do it completely differently. OK, well, that was encouraging. And right now, he sent me this nice document in which he outlined the way he thought Windows worked. It was it was a good beginning, not quite accurate. But I think the more interesting part was that he said, well, what you want to do is great, but it's messing up Node.js source code. And that's because it involved a lot of if-defs. If you have ever written any C code, you know what it does. That's like conditional compilation. And what happened is if you do that too much, everything becomes unreadable. And so what he said is, let's write this library called libuv, an abstraction library written in C just for consumption by Node.js. So we did that. What was also very important, at that point, we had 2 people working on the project, not just one. What was also very practical is that we got a little bit of budget, and so we managed to hire 1 more person, and then Microsoft got involved, and they paid for yet another person. And suddenly, we had 4 people, and that actually helped a lot. So I told you, when you start with that little bit of naivete, you don't really get far, or nothing might work. But with a group of 4 people dedicated to do one thing and do it right, you actually have a good shot at making it work. So that's how it worked. Later on, by the way, in the process, this became much more of an issue. So for a year, we had our little fellowship of the ring, but people of course, move on. And so Ryan Dahl actually was the first person to move on. Then another leader was appointed who also moved on at some point. And that, the Microsoft guy moved on. And that churn and, not being able to actually find new other people was really a risk for the project later on. I'll get there in a little bit. But first, I want to go here. Leadership, or another way to make decisions. Here's another kid show, I think. Well, kid show. Leadership in an open source project is really difficult once you lose your leader. Of course, when the project founder is around, it's really simple. This person makes all the decisions. This person decides. This person makes the final call. And I think most importantly, people sort of, assume that there is no other way. The person has authority. So for the first couple of years, when our great leader Ryan Dahl was around, we could make decisions by basically a pen stroke. The original title of this talk was supposed to be why there are no promises in Node. Well, the reason there are no promises in Node is because he said there would be no promises in Node. That's, of course, a little bit more complicated, which is why it says also another way to make decisions. What happened in 2010 is there was no standardized way to do promises. That actually it came much later. Nowadays, there's a standard for it. It didn't exist at the time. And so people that were not really involved in actually writing much of the project, they had their opinions. Some people said it should look like this. I want to have this method on my promise. I want to do cancellation, or I don't want to do cancellation. I want it to be an object. I want it to be a function. And so after a while, this became such a big distraction that it became impossible to make any other progress in the project. And so what he said at that point is, well, we'll just throw them out. Callbacks. Callbacks seem the most simple solution. This, by the way, is a big, I hate this. I think promises would have been a much better thing to just keep around and, tweak as we go. And the unfortunate thing, though, is that once a decision like this is made, it becomes impossible to change. If you, I'll get there actually in a later point. Another way to make decisions is also important. As you know, Ryan Dahl at some point moved on, and another person, Isaac Schluter, you might know his name from NPM, from being the founder of NPM. He became the leader, and he had also been involved, and so that came with a lot of authority as well. I think people listened to him. But the cracks in the system started to show. So there were a couple of things that we couldn't really agree on, but they happened anyway. And people questioned it a lot. But OK, it worked. So we're now talking the year of 2000, let me think, 2012. Yes, that was mostly Isaac Schluter's year. But he too moved on. And then yet another person was appointed, and who had really not much history with the project at all. And that made it like even harder. So people started to disagree more and more. And eventually people realized like this is not going to work. We need another way to make decisions. That other way to make decisions didn't happen until actually fairly recently. But I think you have all heard about IO.js. I mean, there was a joke about it in the intro. Some people laughed, so they must have known about it. The reason this IO.js happened at all had basically to do with the lack of authority in the project, and for us finding a way to make decisions in a different manner. Nowadays, by the way, you might know, it's like there's a technical steering committee. I'm still a member. I might not be for very long, but I'm still a member. There's like 14 other members. We vote if we don't get there. And so we basically do this thing where people say yes or no. It's not ideal. The unfortunate thing with bigger groups is that they usually don't outperform their best sort of member, right? But the good news is that at least we can make decisions now and like make progress instead of like forever getting stuck on doing nothing. Something you need in a project as well is money. Like US dollars, that will do, right? I think you do like Swedish krones, but that's this would not be very much in Swedish krones, I suppose. Money is actually very important, but not for the reason you might think it is. Money is important to keep a project independent. I can tell you, I can tell you now because this is no longer a problem. But for the first couple years, it was very easy to rig Node.js. If you wanted to get a feature in that only benefited you, you just had to throw some money at the problem. And this is how you do it. Well, there's basically two ways. The easiest way was to just, pay me. Yeah, I wish people had done that more. But people have tried, by the way, to get features in through Joyent and through Strong Loop. And sometimes we actually did that. And sometimes we tried to, and then we couldn't get it done. So I'll give you some examples. At some point, there was like a couple months of where we announced isolates, or basically a way to run multiple threads of JavaScript inside Node.js. That was something that a big and very well-known Russian search engine just basically paid us a lot of money to do. And the unfortunate thing was that at that point, the state of the code base wasn't in a great shape, and so we were unable to pull it off. Another feature that is in Node that you probably don't even realize is you have cluster, right? Cluster is for load balancing. You can do that with UDP as well. A little startup from South Africa paid Strong Loop, before it even existed, to add that feature to it. But these were all pretty mild because we always had like a long-term vision for Node.js, and so we didn't really sell out in the way that we added a feature that was really bad. Like we said no to these kinds of requests. The better way to get anything done is to hire someone that sends patches to the project and then just keep nagging. Because here's the thing. If there's very few people working on a project and they have to look at a lot of different things at the same time, if you just if there's one person with a lot of time on their hands who just keeps asking for one thing, take the feedback if there's any, make tiny improvement, ask for more feedback. At some point, the maintainers will want this person to go away. And usually the only way to make them go away is to actually do what they ask for. So if you want to manipulate an open source project that doesn't have a lot of money itself, but you have it, this is the trick. Money guarantees independence of a project. It allows a project to make its own decisions, and it avoids sort of this attention trap. Money is, by the way, really difficult to get for an open source project because you are all developers, and I'm going to say something bad about you, but I'm a developer myself. You are like super, what's the word, frugal as you are very frugal. I wonder how many people here have ever paid for a development tool? Can I see hands? Oh, there's actually a fair amount. That's good. Well, I have never. I think nowadays, of course, it's not really expected anymore. I think I learned programming with like bootlegged copies of Microsoft Quick C or something. But no, I have never. And as an open source guy, like, nobody ever pays you for things. I think there was an individual developer who ever promised me a bottle of scotch for some feature that I added. I'm still waiting for it, and that's sort of where it ends. Typically, where money comes from is from big companies. And enterprises, that's also why StrongLoop obviously is, tries to write enterprise software. There's a lot more money in it, and through that, we can actually fund the development of the open source thing that you're using and that we don't expect you to pay for. Nowadays, of course, there's a foundation, and the question, and there's a fair amount of money in it. I think currently a couple million, expecting to go over 10, I think, for the next year or so. So that's actually a good amount. And the question is really what those companies expect in return. That's an open question. The thing I think to look out for is to avoid becoming Java in that sense. That sounds like a joke, but it's not. What happened with Java is like it started obviously 2 decades earlier than Node.js. So the times were different, but very early in that process, a lot of commercial interest basically, usurped the open source attitude. And so nowadays, if you as a community member would want to contribute to Java, I'm sure you would have to sign up for an Oracle developer account, sign your soul away like with a 40-page contract. I'm not kidding. And then if you download any proposal that they are making, it will probably start with a 40-page contract, and then there's like 2 pages of like draft change to Java to it. I would try if I had the internet set up. You can do it. Just go to like the Java community process page. This is how it works. Something we want to avoid. At the same time, what we want to avoid is becoming PHP, and PHP obviously is kind of like dying off a little bit, partly because it never got the funding to make, for example, a great virtual machine. Well, nowadays, Facebook does it like, maybe 5 years too late. And that's also very unfortunate. So this is a thin line to walk, but definitely you need money. Money is also the issue, by the way, when it comes to finding that great staff that was in dedicated people that get the job done. Everybody that I worked with, even in the early times, was on payroll somewhere. It's great to have community members. I mean, and I'm sincere. I find it great to work with. But these people, if you have a job, and even doesn't matter how much you like programming, you don't necessarily have a lot of time to really go deep into a project. So, in order to actually make technical progress, you want to have people that are on payroll, that have no other obligations, that that just can focus on making your open source project great. You can see it, by the way, also if you think about Angular.js. That works fine because Google funds them. And then at the very different end of the spectrum, if you think about OpenSSL, OpenSSL is a very pathological case where the entire world came to rely on a project that was maintained by volunteers, basically. And I think everybody who had actually worked with the source code knew it was a mess, but I think the world didn't realize until Heartbleed happened, right? And people were like, oh my God, how is this even possible? Well, it was possible because a lot of volunteers, but nobody dedicated to actually maintaining that stuff. And that all boiled down to not having money, and so nowadays that's a little bit better. Something you need here is a cohesive community. And what I mean by a cohesive community is really a vague concept. I understand that. But what I mean is communities are very, very special animals. I don't know how many people here would consider themselves part of the Node.js community, but this is probably a very difficult question even for yourself, because what does it even mean to be part of the open, If I follow a bug report, does it make me part of the community? If I subscribe to the mailing list, do I have to send patches to be part of the Node.js community or go to a conference? It's like, that's very unclear. But the thing with communities is that they tend to have a lot of, they have sort of an average thought of their own, which is really hard to control. And I'll give you a couple examples. One of the things is that communities, as long as there's a great leader, they will sort of think the same thing, and then after a while they will assume that this is the only way, or it is somehow meant to be. So I told you how promises were removed from Node.js at some point, and that was before that the community actually wanted to have promises. Now I would love to bring promises back, but now I have to fight the community because everybody is like, well, but callbacks are great. No, callbacks are great. This is just how it's supposed to be. This is it's a really interesting effect. I'll give you some more examples. For example, when IO.js, well, I didn't create IO.js, but I joined when Fedor published it. But at that time, we had a hard time convincing people that actually IO.js had, more promise to it than Node, that it would probably be better. And then when half a year later, we wanted to join back with Node, we found that the community had sort of dug into the position that we had earlier proposed, which is that IO.js was great, and now we had to convince them to go back, which was actually pretty hard, and I'm happy that we did it then, because I think if we had waited half a year more, it would have been impossible, and there would have been some faction that would have stuck with IO.js, so we would not be able to unfork. Another example is libuv. Libuv is basically my brainchild, and there's always people that want to do a low-level version of Node, which is basically libuv and JavaScript sort of directly glued together. And what I always have to explain to people is libuv is not necessarily the only way to do things. They assume that the abstraction that libuv offers is somehow magically perfect. And so when I tell them, well, if you do it in JavaScript, actually you should do it slightly bit different, because it's not always that consistent, etc. They will reply to me with no, libuv, this abstraction is great, and we should expose it directly to JavaScript, with no further understanding that this is all man-made. It's like we just did it this way, but it could be any other way. Really, really, believe me. And I know it's not that perfect. A cohesive community is important. What happens if your open source project starts falling apart a little bit? This really comes to show. So early 2014, when Node had no leadership, or the leadership was really questionable, the community sort of stepped up. And the way they stepped up is they reached out to me and another couple of other people with, hey, we want to do a fork. This was, by the way, almost a year before, more like half a year before IO.js actually existed. There were 4 factions in the community that all said, we think this is the time to fork Node.js. And this is where it shows that a community is great to have, because they recognized the problem even before I was ready to do something about it. But this also shows that cohesiveness is also really important, because 4 factions really, like, you can do, like, 1 fork was bad enough. 4 forks? No, really. So the question is how you build a cohesive community. I think we have some answers now, and I think we didn't know at the time, but I think getting people actually involved in the decision-making process, explaining to them why things are happening in a particular way, are key ingredients to it. I'm going to go to yet another thing. It gets even more abstract, right? Like, full of platitudes. I told you that. A structure that creates balance between different interests. I think that is now the challenge that we're facing in Node.js. So after unforking IOJS and Node, after creating the foundation, after the people of IOJS also went into foundation, etc., we made all these rules, like, we're going to make the technical steering committee is going to make decisions. The board is going to make financial things. We will have work groups that have the different expertise areas, etc. And the reason is not that we believe that by itself really solves much problems. The reason is that, just by creating a structure in which different interests are balanced, people will have more trust in your project and they're more willing to participate. Something that already struck us when we created IOJS and we had a little bit of this is that suddenly the contributorship sort of exploded. People were like, hey, this is no longer a one-man show. This is something that the project shows that they're willing to work with everyone. And so this is much more important when your project is a little bit bigger, obviously. And now I forgot what I was going to say about this. Oh, and it also has become much more important because of the money that's now involved. So, in the past it was all like small, like one-man shops, few people involved. Nowadays, like, it's like me against IBM, for example. That's a very different situation. I can never, like, if they sue me, I can never win, right? And they might, I don't know, if I step on their patents, whatever. Creating a structure in which, like, little man people and, like, very large corporations can work together and where their interests are balanced becomes very important. I also think it's very important that we as, like, individual developers are adamant to the needs of, like, large corporations, and they should be to us, obviously, like, not like Java where it's only large corporations, but we should be adamant to their needs too. The reason being, like, not only that they fund us, but, well, like, the fact that something is a corporation does not make their interests invalid. That sounds a little silly, maybe, but what I learned, for the past couple of months, I've been embedded in a big Canadian bank. What I learned is that there's people that want to use Node.js and they struggle with all these things, like things that as an individual developer you would never encounter. For example, deploying seems really hard to them, and the reason is that the only thing they can do is, like, pack everything up and throw it over the wall, like, and the other side of the wall has no internet. And then they somehow, like, need to understand how to run that thing. Something that as an individual developer you would probably never encounter, but it's still very important to think about these things. And if we want to go to world domination, which I want to do with Node.js, then we have to rule the big enterprise as well. That's about balance. So there's a little bit of, like, current challenges. In 6 years' time, we've basically gotten from, like, an individual that had a great idea to a community with a structure and something that works. But I wouldn't say everything is perfect at this point. Challenges that we're dealing with is, well, okay, first of all, a couple weeks ago, we had a Node core contributor, or Node Collaborator is what it's called now, Node Collaborator Summit. And what we try to do there is set some goals, set some expectations for the next couple of years about what we want to do, and also to just get a feeling of what people that are willing to contribute to Node.js, what they're struggling with. And two questions came up. Well, like first of all, people asked us, like, what is Node? And like that may seem like a very obvious answer, because Node is that thing you download. You go to a website, you click on like x64, and like there it downloads, right? But the reality is nowadays, Node.js has this philosophy of like, let's stay small. And so if you have a very big community and a very small project, those people feel like they may not be part of it. Because like it's a very crowded room if you have it's a very small room with a lot of people in it. And so the question really that they wanted answered is like, what role can I have in this project? So we can expand the definition of like anything related to Node.js, like the entire NPM ecosystem, or maybe all the important parts, or maybe Node and libuv or whatever. But I think what Node.js currently is missing is a sense of identity. This will probably in the future even be a little bit exacerbated by the fact that there will be alternative runtimes. Like there's F5 Networks that makes an appliance that runs Node.js, which really has nothing to do with the code base that we wrote. Or there's people that try to run exactly the same thing, but on a JVM. It has nothing to do with the thing we wrote. So we need a sense of identity. The other challenge is that since the advent of IOJS, we've seen a steep rise in contributorship. So if you look at like Node.js 4, which was released Monday or Tuesday, whatever, you'll notice that it even says like there's 40 new contributors, right? Up from 4 or 5, whatever. We now have like 20 work groups that deal with translation. The issue I'm seeing with this is that all these contributors, that's pretty great, but the type of contributions that they offer is typically very shallow. So people hack a little bit on like the user-facing JavaScript portion. They send us a patch, and we might take it, we might not take it, depending on what everyone wants. But what we don't see a lot is that people really go deep. Like sometimes we need we might benefit if someone added a feature to V8. V8 is a JavaScript engine. It's really hard to hack. Even for me, it's pretty challenging. But that basically never happens. And so my prediction for the future is that there will be professionals who actually write the code, and there will be a community that basically like says what they want, that only tell us what their experience is, what they would like to see. And I think that's actually a good model. This is why I love the community, because it gets us out of the situation where we just do things because I feel like it, or because some committee of academics decide things. The community serves as a very direct feedback mechanism from users. But I think what we have to get comfortable with is the fact that professionals are probably going to implement most of the things, and that the community is going to express their wishes. This is something I'm saying, it's a current challenge. We haven't really officially recognized this as an issue yet, or figured out what to do with it. But if you have any great ideas, find me in the hallway and talk to me about it. So where does it leave you guys? I don't know if you consider yourself part of the Node.js community or not. I think we would love to have you there. Even if I don't expect you to write super great patches to V8. It would be awesome if you did, by the way. I'm serious. I have a wish list. But what I would like you to do is follow what's going on, and just follow it, and maybe not say much most of the time, And if there's something that you really don't like or really think we should do, make yourself heard. One of the things is that usually the people that have very extreme opinions are the most vocal, and the people that are just, they're kind of content with the way things are, they don't show up. And I would like to see those people show up more as well. So please follow, go to GitHub, set some filter, whatever, follow it, find some issues that you find interesting, and make yourself heard. That's the end of my talk. Thank you very much.